I think the young people realizing that graduating from college with a median debt of $29,000 in the United States means that for the first decade or 2 decades of their lives, they can't buy a house, their first house, where they put down a couple $1,000s and just start making payments that are, for the first few years, mostly interest, and over time, eventually they end up with equity. That they can't do that. They can't start a family. They can't, people are doing all these things later and later because of the economy, because the rich are getting richer, and because the average working middle-class American and working-class Americans are screwed. And then Congress, in their infinite wisdom back in the middle of the Bush administration, I think it was around 2006, said, let's reform the reform, right? Be careful, whatever they use that word. Let's reform the bankruptcy laws so that if somebody wants to declare bankruptcy, it used to be if you declared bankruptcy, the one thing you could not discharge in a bankruptcy petition, the one thing you couldn't get rid of, the one debt you couldn't leave behind was your taxes. Well, they said, let's add student loans to that. And suddenly student loan debt became like gold, right? And so the banksters, everybody jumped into this and everybody got in the business of it, including our federal government. And we've got this giant scam going on where student loan debt has exploded. And you've got a whole new generation that is basically indentured servants. And they're starting to say no more. The debt jubilee for student debt. Or at least let's re-reform our bankruptcy laws so that students can declare bankruptcy on their student debt. Or their parents who co-signed for it can discharge it. Frankly, I think we should have an absolute jubilee. We should wipe it all out. We should say, before Reagan, college, for most people in the United States, college was free or so close to free that you could go to college with a part-time job at the level of washing dishes in a local restaurant, which I did. Or being a waitress in the local restaurant, which is what my wife did back in the 60s, back in the late 60s. This was before Reagan came into office. And in California, you could go to college for free, and in several other states, too. In large part because of what Abraham Lincoln did when he established the land-grant colleges, over 50 of them around the United States. Free colleges. Invest in the intellectual infrastructure of our country. And I think we need to look back and say, when Reagan ended free college in California in the 1970s, saying, why should I pay for the education of these young people when they then go out and protest against me and call me names? Which is essentially what he said. You can find the exact quotes out there, but that's pretty close to it. It was a spiteful thing. There was no thought to this. There was no, our young people are our future. They are our intellectual infrastructure. None of that on the part of Reagan. When he said that in the 70s and he destroyed free college in California, and then he moved into the White House and he made William Bennett the first Secretary of Education. William Bennett, who had in the 1980 campaign for president, had thrown his hat in the ring on the platform of ending the Department of Education and all federal funding for schools. Remember, back in that day in 1980, 80% of the cost of going to college was paid for by state, federal, and local governments and school endowments. Students only tuition, the tuition that you paid only represented about 20% of the total cost of your education. So it was affordable. Now it's completely reversed. After 33 years of Reaganomics and Bill Bennett's education policies, 80% of the cost of going to school is paid for by you, the student, and only 20% is paid for by the government, which is insane. We got $1 trillion in student loan debt. We should be investing not just in our bridge infrastructure, but in our future infrastructure, our intellectual infrastructure, our young people. The GI Bill actually made a profit. The amount of tax revenue paid by people who had increased their earning power because they went to college on the GI Bill more than paid for the GI Bill. We know from the history of the United States, when you give people free education, as a government, you make a profit.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 866-987-THOM.
So why don't we do that? Well, because the banksters are making money. To hell with the banksters. It's time for us to take this country back. Back with your calls right after this.